The word bread might invoke a lot of things. It can be a rustic sourdough loaf like this, or maybe you are thinking of freshly steamed pillowy bao buns. Others might be thinking of a towering panettone with dried fruits and an aroma of liqueur. Whichever bread takes your preference, we know that all of them share a common ancestor. And today we are going to find out how to make and taste this common ancestor. So please join us in Taberna for the first bread. Bread is more than just food. Bread has been so important it has become a staple of mythology, religious rites, and folk tradition. So, to tell the story of bread is to tell the story of humanity itself. So, we are going to need a human. Okay, we could have gotten a better specimen, but this one will do. He has a little cook's jacket though, that's nice. Let him get used to his new surroundings. The reason bread is so crucial in human history is because the dawn of bread also marks the start of the sedentary human. No, not like that. With sedentary human, we mean the transition from nomadic hunter-gatherer to settled farmer. Although we did not go from caveman to plowman in one go, it was a pretty quick revolution, known as the Neolithic Revolution. A large part of this revolution came about when humans domesticated grains that allowed them to make bread. However, it is a common theory that the first bread was made before this and thus served as an incentive to pursue domestication of the grass we now call wheat. In other words, one of the biggest events in human history might have been caused by the love of bread. The first bread was most likely made from a wild version of einkorn wheat. We want this to be a guide which you can follow along at home, so we are going to use a domesticated variety of einkorn. The berries for the first bread were probably ground using something like this, a quernstone. Grain would be ground on a smooth rock with a coarser rock. We don't have one of these, but we do have a granite mortar and pestle, which is close enough. I think you know what to do. There we go, we'll check back in when he's done. All going well here, we see. That won't make much bread yet. Keep at it. There's a good human. Now, you do not have to go through all of this. These days, due to the boom in heritage flours, commercially milled einkorn flour is easily available. So by all means, feel free to just go and buy a bag. Our human, on the other hand, has to go through the full historic experience, as he represents humanity in all of this. He therefore has to go through the manual toil. No shortcuts. But it looks like he did an admirable job. The flour he ground is weirdly fine. If you also ground your own flour but it isn't as fine, feel free to sieve it. Now, it would be weird to use exact measurements for a bread predating written language, but just to give you a bit of a rough range, we'll be using 300 milliliters of water for 350 grams of flour. We'll then add flour along the way until it gets the right consistency. Since this bread isn't leavened, we could now add salt, but we are not going to do that. How did he... Never mind. We are not adding salt, seeing as the first bread probably dates from before the first extraction of salt by humans. At this point, our ancestors would get their salt from meat. Now, we appreciate that you might be worried that this will affect the taste, but not to worry. According to Bread, A Global History by William Rubel, we mainly put salt in bread these days to mask the flavor of oxidation, which occurs in commercially milled flour. Since our flour has been freshly ground by hand, this should not be an issue, and it should taste just fine. If you did not grind your own flour, feel free to add some salt. Start kneading and add flour until you get the right consistency. Now, when we say right consistency, we mean anything less adhesive than industrial glue. Do not expect this dough to start behaving like modern high-gluten doughs. If you are expecting this, you are in for a nightmare. Add more flour to make it more manageable, but make sure your dough stays at least a little bit tacky. If it is no longer tacky, we're no longer making breads, we're baking bricks. We devised a test. Pat out a disc on a floured work surface and wait a minute. If it doesn't release easily, you need more flour and/or kneading. The patties should release with relative ease. At worst, a little nudge with a dough scraper. Once your dough is sort of coherent, shape them into circles or oblongs. Don't aim for perfect circles, as the lack of gluten will make this difficult. Also, don't roll them out or make them too thin. We found the ideal thickness to be 1.5 centimeters. We need to turn this dough into bread by baking it. Again, this is an area of debate. Some say that the first breads were probably cooked on stones heated by sunshine. However, we're not in an ideal geographical position to test this. Yeah. Don't worry, there is another theory which we can test. According to William Rubel, the first breads were baked in the hot ashes of bonfires. We have adapted this for the modern kitchen. The roll of the pit will be played by a cast iron pot, put in an oven. The breads would be wrapped in leaves. For this, we're using baking paper. The roll of the hot ash will be played by salt. As long as the salt stays dry, it won't melt until it goes over 800 degrees Celsius. Your oven does not get that hot. Fill about 1/3 of the pot with salt. Don't worry, this is not as wasteful as it looks. You can reuse the salt afterwards. Just keep it dry and properly labeled. Set the oven to as high as it can go. Then put the pot of salt into the oven for about an hour. While the pot is in the oven, we are going to wrap the bread in baking paper. Make sure it's nicely wrapped and we get as little salt in there as possible, even though you will fail and it will get everywhere. Once the salt is hot, get the pot out and bury the bread. This is harder than it looks since the salt is ripping hot. We now realize it would probably have been smarter to heat up the salt outside of the pot and add it in at this stage. Put the pot back in the oven and turn the oven off. After about 15 to 20 minutes, get the pot out and dig up your freshly cooked Neolithic bread. Unwrap it, notice by the salt that got in there that you did not do a good job wrapping the bread, and let it cool down. Now enjoy the first bite of the first bread. Since this was made with freshly ground flour, the lack of salt should not impede the flavor. Even if you did add salt to this, don't get too high in expectation. It's by no means bad, but it's sort of bread's first draft and represents the start of millennia of innovation and improvements that resulted in your present-day sarnie. Smells great though. This concludes our first foray into our brand new series on the history of bread. Please join us every fortnight for the next 12 weeks for a new episode in this wondrous journey that will take us from the banks of the Nile to the halls of Versailles, from Roman grey bread to Japanese melon pan. It will all be covered in the rise of bread. But before we go, here's a quick preview of things to come. We hope you enjoy this first episode of our Rise of Bread series. As you can see from the upload count, this is a brand new channel, and we appreciate all the constructive feedback in the comments below. If you are not into leaving comments, please leave a like, or even better, hit subscribe. It means the world to us. We hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks when we go to ancient Sumeria and discover the bread of Gilgamesh.